Peace, peace, peace. Welcome to another episode of Wise the Dome TV. Today, I have a very, very special guest. This sister is a voice for the colonized. She's an anti-imperialist thinker. She's a dope Twitch streamer. She does a lot. No, but it's a way to get media. It's a way to
Yeah.
get your ideas out. And uh, uh, we're about to get into a lot of great information and a great conversation. But Hayat, I thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I
No,
did after we kind of agreed to do this, I sort of did like a deep dive
mhm.
on some of the people you've had on the show. I'm quite familiar with Doctor Hood Scholar, so that was an episode I really enjoyed.
Dope,
So
dope.
yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you. So yeah, let's get into the first question I wanted to ask you, because I'm not sure that a lot of people even know much about it, even those who, have anti-imperialist political ideology. Um, can you talk about some of the history of the Somaliweyn ideology and movement and what some of its core ideas are?
Yeah, so the Somaliweyn movement really kind of was birthed out of like a reaction to colonialists sort of descending upon the Horn of Africa. So it
Hmm.
kind of begins, well, the story of the Somaliweyn project really just begins at the Berlin Conference and the scramble for Africa. So you
Right.
have colonialists that come and, literally had a meeting one day among themselves, sat
Hmm.
down and divided up the entire continent of Africa amongst themselves. And the horn, which I will throughout the interview refer to, when I say the horn, it means different. For a lot of people, the horn means different things for different people.
Hmm.
But when I say the horn, I'm specifically talking about Somalia, Ethiopia, and Eritrea.
Okay.
So just to make that clear, so it's not encompassing the entirety of East Africa, because that includes like a bunch of other countries. Oh,
Gotcha.
and Kenya.
Okay.
Sorry, look. So Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Kenya, and what is known as Djibouti
Okay.
are the five. Yeah, and so it begins there. And in the beginning, like most Somali people didn't really organize themselves,
Hmm.
what is considered now to be Somalia. We were mostly kind of, I think this is can be spoken to like most groups of people within Africa. We were a nomadic people. You kind of just like existed where you wanted to exist. If you wanted to be on the coast, you'd be on the coast. If you wanted to be more inland, you'd go inland. So the whole idea of a border is a very alien concept to us.
Hmm.
And yeah, and so the Somaliweyn movement really began as a reaction to colonialists coming, drawing borders that are not representative to the people who are on the ground today there. And so when you Google the country Somalia, you see it as like just like the horn.
Hmm.
But most Somali people either live in Djibouti,
Hmm.
in what is now Ethiopia, in what is the region called Ogaden,
Hmm.
and in northern Kenya. And so the translation for the word Somaliweyn literally translates into Greater Somalia, or unity of Somali, or
Hmm.
Somali unity.
Right.
Um, yeah. And yeah, so it's
No,
really rooted in an anti-colonial legacy.
yeah.
And it's a rallying cry for Somali people being able to determine what our nation, and putting quotation marks around that, what that nation is going to look like. And so for a lot of people, looking at the movement, it can sort of seem as kind of like a very backwards, like nationalistic project. It's just like these Africans, like once again, just trying to, mess up shit for the
Hmm.
sake of messing up stuff. But it goes way deeper than that, because yeah, we've just haven't had for literally like, oh, decades and decades, not being able to determine what our destiny looks
Right.
like, right? And
Right.
so
No, and no, that's a yeah, and that's a great point. And that's what colonialism does. It creates artificial borders, artificial country lines, state lines, and it forces the people to fit inside that paradigm that uh colonialists create. And then a lot of times historically we've seen that there has, due to these lines that are created by these colonialists, it has caused conflict with many groups who may not have necessarily had a reason to conflict before, you know, colonialism and things of that nature. And so whenever they, during the Berlin Conference, whenever they did carve up Africa, when we look at what Somalia is now, right, the borders that were created, did that cause any conflict with, indigenous populations? And if you can you expound some of
Yeah, so like for even before, like let's make something good. I think sometimes when people look at Africa, they sometimes will infantilize it a bit. They'll
Mhm.
think that it's like this continent where everybody was kind of like living in peace and
Yeah.
everyone was getting along, and then white people came and just made everything worse. There was conflict in the continent before ever like there were
Right.
any colonialists or white people that were ever there, right?
Right.
And the conflicts between, say, Somali people and the Abyssinian Empire, which is considered what is called now Ethiopia today,
Hmm.
we've been going at it for hundreds of years. Like
Hmm.
that's always been a thing. But what colonialism does is it takes those conflicts and exacerbate it to a level of violence that we've never seen before, right?
Hmm.
And so Ethiopia, I think there's also like there's an Ethiopian sort of narrative that also exists. Like a lot of the times people will refer to Ethiopia as like, oh, the African country that was never colonized,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So although that is true, yes, I think there's a big part of the question of the story that's missing there, where Ethiopia, again, the Abyssinian Empire, sort of was like an incredibly old empire, right?
Right. Right.
Oftentimes you have Europeans that come in, they see Africans, they either try to establish like, religion or like their way of living, right? But
Right.
because the Abyssinian Empire was hundreds and hundreds of years old, they had an established religion, a culture. At the time, the Italians it didn't make sense to them to tear all of that down and build everything anew, right?
Hmm.
And so they saw the Abyssinian Empire as an opportunity for partnership and welcomed them to the table. And they were full blown like colonial collaborationists that sat them down. Was like, look, clearly you have enemies to the east. You've been fighting with these guys for hundreds of years. Work with us. You'll get a cut of whatever we get a cut of, right?
Wow. Hmm.
And so that's pretty much like the story of how you have a region in Ethiopia today that is
Hmm.
like filled to the brim with Somali people, like ethnically speak the language, are Muslims, they're Somali through and through, but are completely like landlocked into what is now Ethiopia today, completely cut off from like their brothers and sisters to the east. And then it was the same thing with the northern frontier district of Kenya, where less of a sinister, collaborationist there and more just like the British Empire going in being like, okay, we'll get this and Italy gets that. Again, dividing people along a border
Right.
that just was not like it's just not representative of the people that are there. And then Djibouti, which was originally called French Somaliland, was the same thing. And it's just they ended up renaming it to Djibouti afterwards. They had three referendums. To this day, people kind of like talk about whether or not, they took a vote to see if they wanted to join the rest of Somalia or if they wanted to be on their own country. They had three referendums.
Hmm.
And there's, just, from what I hear from like within the community, people say that to this day, like all three referendums were hacked by the French in order so they continue to have their outpost there in East Africa. And now it's like Djibouti has kind of been just reduced to just the like a port for military
Right.
what's the word? I'm not military, not outposts, but I'm losing the word here. Uh,
Um,
not outposts, but
yeah, no,
um, I don't know.
like a base, like
A base,
yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
okay, all right, all right. No, I got you,
But
I
it's
got
like, yeah, so
you.
there's like
Mhm.
a bunch of French, British, like there's a Japanese
Mm.
military base in Africa. Why the Japanese are in Africa, I don't know, but
Right.
yeah, and it sucks because the people there are unable to protest.
Hmm.
It's really hard to protest when the entire world's military bases are all hyper concentrated in one
Right.
area.
Right.
So, yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
I
a
think,
that's a great that's a point I don't think I have thought about how that does cripple a lot of protests and rebellion, just having all of these different military bases from these Western powers all in one
yeah,
central location. Whenever all right, and so one thing with the Somaliweyn movement, is this a movement that would you say has picked up more steam with the diaspora, the Somalian diaspora, compared to those who still live in the area, or would you say it's a little bit it's equal? Like what would you say?
So yeah, so I should make it clear that obviously I'm from like the diaspora,
Hmm.
and there is a after the Civil War, a lot of my parents' generation fled, and they fled all across to Kenya, Ethiopia, England, Canada. I'm from Canada originally, the United States, Australia, literally all over the world. So there is an entire generation of Somali youth that are 100% Somali and are just first generation completely. And so I feel like a lot of us have sort of vigorously lived through or sort of lived through the idea of Somali through our parents, through
Mm.
going back home, like a handful of times. I've gone back home a few times myself. Not as often as I'd like. Tickets to Africa are very expensive.
Right, right,
So
absolutely.
um, and yeah, I would say that there is now within the diaspora. Oh, and our parents also like really ingrained like the what we call Somali Nimo, which is like the values of being Somali.
Mm.
Most of us are very fluent in our language and our religion, and so we're very like we still have a very strong hold to our identity, right?
Right, right,
But it's
right.
still like we're not raised there, right? We weren't
Hmm.
born there, and it's still I think there's like an element of a sense of belonging that kind of exists among Somali people, and especially among Somali youth. And so you see it manifest in different ways.
Hmm.
A lot of it is through either like being devout Muslims. A lot of it is being sort of like being incredibly knowledgeable
Hmm.
on the history of Somali. So like
Hmm.
most Somali people you will bump into are like I always joke are like mini politicians. Like we all are very like we know our history like the back of our
Yeah.
hand, and like growing up my dad would either be at a cafe somewhere chilling with his friends, and he's like screaming at the top of his lungs about politics or whatever. Like everybody is incredibly almost like it's become so much of like a detriment. It's become like annoying to like why is everybody such a so
You know,
why is everybody a historian right
well,
now?
look, it's funny because when I was doing some research for this show, I found myself in like Somali message boards,
Yeah.
and everybody, like you said, I mean, they were able to break down, the politics, the history of what's going on, um, more than a lot of like mainstream or news articles I was reading. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty profound because I think I mean, that's having a knowledge itself, man, and we should all strive to have that and understand who we are, our origin, how we got to where we are. And I think that's a beautiful thing that you and many other Somalis have that. I think that's a beautiful thing. If you can, you mentioned a lot of people from the area end up moving to different places, United States, Kenya, Canada, Australia, you mentioned. What was the war that caused everybody to leave?
So there was the so we should start from the beginning.
Okay.
Basically a socialist construction was established in Somalia that be ran from the 60s all the way up until the 90s.
Mm.
And it's one of the very it's a very underlooked part of socialist history that I find. Um, I think most of the people who are probably watching the show are aware that I have very, socialist Marxist leanings.
Hmm.
So I'm not going to try to hide that. Let's just lay that
No,
on the
no, no.
table.
Look, we see the Huey and the, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
come
yeah.
on, yeah, no,
What?
that's
Yeah,
what it
exactly,
is.
exactly.
Yeah,
Perfect, perfect.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and um, yeah, and it was a socialist construction like through and through. It was an attempt at socialism. And to really just like summarize it was after at one point with the Somaliweyn movement, there was an attempt to get back parts of Somaliland.
Hmm.
And a war was initiated between Somalia and Ethiopia. And through that, Somalia ended up losing the war because of intervention. due to the authoritarian regime that existed in Ethiopia being backed by the Soviets and the Cubans.
Mm.
It was something like 18,000 Cubans literally set foot on
Wow.
East African territory and fought like arm in arm with Somali people. I've had conversations with people who would tell me that they'd have family members that fought in the war that because of that war became fluent in Spanish because of how much contact they had with
Wow.
Cuban soldiers on the ground.
Wow.
And so it was a bloody war. And because of the losing of that war,
Mm.
it sent internal conflicts within the region. The socialist construction lost support from the people that were there, and they ended up sort of backing out and returning into their own clan territories. Somalia has a very deep clan and clan like culture
Hmm.
that goes back to like family ties and stuff. And yeah, so basically everybody just started turning on each other. And that enacted the Civil War, and everyone just started fleeing because they completely it delved. I can't even like articulate it properly. It like delved into chaos.
Yeah.
And so my parents and our parents' generation, who would have roughly been about our age or even younger, were just like this. This is like there's no functioning government anymore. And they just decided to. It was one of the largest like refugee crises at the time,
Yeah.
and it was actually one of the first time that Western countries like took in refugees,
Hmm.
just took them in. Like there was no usually when there's like some kind of like crisis that's happening in the world, uh, Western countries are hesitant to take them in, but it was one of the very first um, ones where everyone just kind of it was like hundreds of thousands of people from going into the UK, United States, Canada, yeah, and then they set roots there and had children, but yeah, I did like a
Yeah.
little of there's a lot more into it.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know much about Black Hawk Down and like how that kind of like the Battle of Mogadishu and how that played out.
I know it's pretty surface level of,
Yeah.
I know I didn't go see the movie on purpose
Okay.
because um uh, before we even get into any of that though, you kind of brought up something that is interesting. Um Being a leftist, right? And having, this war that you spoke about and the Soviet and Cuba's involvement. Um, just kind of like how you stated earlier, as far as whenever we study the history of Africa, a lot of times, you know, um, we have the ability to romanticize certain things sometimes. Because it's, we are African people, right? And so it's kind of, but when it comes to being a leftist, like, is there some being Somali and having, knowing that history, was there any type of conflict at any point in your life where you were, you know, like, okay, like I like socialism, Marxism. This is my political ideology, but here in Somali, there
Mhm.
was obviously issues with some of these
Yeah.
socialist nations in, Soviet Union, Cuba. And
Yeah.
so was there any type of inner conflict that you were having at any point of your life, just trying to reconcile the two?
Yeah, I think I've had plenty of conflicts on that. I'm still having them. Like
Hmm. Right.
it's still like an ongoing thing. Um, and I think, well, first and foremost, I think it's just coming from a place of ignorance.
Mm.
A lot of people just don't really know anything about Somalia. They just simply don't.
Right.
And so when you're coming at it from a perspective of, say, like a socialist understanding, um, they're speaking on it from a place of ignorance.
Hmm.
At least if I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, right? And then the second part is like, because the regime that existed in Ethiopia also called itself a Marxist state, people do this thing where it's wild to me, where like they'll just see like a communism happening somewhere, and they'll be like, that's, I'm just going to support that because there's hammer and sickles, they're saying, dictatorship of the proletariat, and they just like support it, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
like huge accounts and like organizations that I've even seen online will share images of what it's called, is called the derg. um and I've had to like either message properly. Sometimes like if the account is too big, I'll just like quote tweet it and be like, this isn't appropriate.
Right. Right.
um and uh and it's like, yeah, and it's just like, again, coming from another place of ignorance where they just see like, they again hammer and sickles somewhere, and they think that like that equals something positive, right?
Right.
But
Right.
as Marxists, there is a an ideological line that we have to have, that is one that is critical, where like you look at an event, a party or whatever, and you do the due diligence of like
Absolutely.
sitting down and just like seeing like what is this party, what was the foundations of this party, right? And to
Hmm.
be clear, like Ethiopia had a genuine Marxist movement that was born out of like students. Like it came out of like a student movement.
Hmm.
It got hijacked by genocidal maniacs, and
Hmm.
Eritreans too were slaughtered. Somalis were slaughtered. Like it was truly like it was a bloodbath, and
Right.
it was supported by the Soviets, and it was and in turn supported by the Cubans, right? And
Hmm.
so, and when I say Cubans, I'm specifically talking about like Fidel, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
and I just want to make that clear, because sometimes when I
Hmm.
say that, like people are very they take that as me as like a critique on Cuba. I'm critiquing Cuba in a very specific historical context. I'm not just dunking on Cuba for the sake of dunking on Cuba.
Right.
And you see that because the disdain that Somali people have for Fidel is very specific, but then we'll celebrate people like Che Guevara. And so it's not just like, it's a very sound critique that's rooted in something of just, it's rooted in the idea of just like, we're trying to correct a wrong here, right?
Right. Hmm.
The Cuban people are currently experiencing like an embargo, a genocidal embargo that's stopping the flow of just like very essential materials for them. So it's not like it's not, we're not critiquing Cuba today. I feel like I have to preference that. I just don't want it to
No,
come off as like,
no, I get it because that's because you know how some people are. I mean,
yeah,
especially when it comes to um, socialist nations, a lot of times, if you are a leftist, your critique of that said nation might not be rooted in, and you might romanticize some things, right? And like,
yeah.
and you're just, and so no, we get it. I understand. And for somebody who has experienced, um, you know, what it was, whose parents have had to leave, because
Mhm.
of something that was um, hijacked, like as you said, by genocidal maniacs. We see what it's like when things are on the jacked up end of the spectrum. You know what I'm saying? And so,
Mhm.
no, I definitely understand your point. It's not a knock. You know what I mean? It's just
Yeah.
stating the reality. And when we look at like the Somaliweyn movement, and we look at um, Somalia and the area, Eritrea, Kenya, Djibouti, and so how does, with there being multiple ethnic groups in these uh, in this region, like how does the Somaliweyn movement approach the issue of identity within Somali society?
Mm. Identity, just like in terms of,
Like if we so it's meaning like is it we're one Somali people regardless to the ethnic group, or is it like, is there more nuance to it, or like I was just kind of curious about that.
so I think what so yeah, so I think in terms of identity, the Somaliweyn movement for the most part is about uniting Somalis under a single vision and under a
Mm,
single flag.
hmm.
And the reason why that's so crucial is because it goes back to this idea of clans, right?
Hmm.
And I say, and sometimes when you hear, and you mentioned how you go on message boards, or sometimes people will use the term clan and tribe interchangeably. It's clans.
Hmm.
Tribes is like a specific different like ethnic group of people. Somali people they're all Somali. Like clans
Right.
are about family names and ties, right?
Right.
But it's ingrained into Somali culture. And so the political identity that Somaliweyn fights for is unity.
Hmm.
And where I'm specifically from, where my family is from the north,
Hmm.
the northern part of Somalia. And there's been a huge issue of secessionists. So the north of Somalia originally used to be governed by Britain. That's how they call themselves Somaliland, right?
Hmm.
And was a British territory. That's how they came into fruition. That's how the borders were drawn. It was not it's just funny because it's like they themselves will literally swear up and down that they had something to do with that. They're a colonial creation.
Hmm.
And they have it in the secessionist project have it in their heads that they are a distinct society that's different from the rest of the region, different from the rest of Somali people, and it really is specific to like one group of like a very family name that is like a more it's like yeah it's a family name, right?
Hmm.
And so outsiders kind of looking into it, I think people are very sensitive to the idea of like self-determination. They see a group somewhere that's like demanding, recognition and to be sovereign and to be independent. And so from outsiders looking in, you see it as like, oh, this is like a group of people who want to separate. Like, of course, why wouldn't we want to support like a self-determination movement, right?
Right.
But it's like it's clear that the secessionists are moving in a direction that's like reactionary,
Hmm.
that's being used to essentially divide Somali people even further, right?
Right. Right.
And yeah, and then like and again, it's like it's so specific too. Like I wish I could like I'm on stream, I'm always showing maps because
Hmm.
it's just very convoluted and very like specific. And it's really coming out and stemming out of like two cities that are dragging the rest of the north along around this dream that they themselves are not even interested in.
Right.
And so, yeah, so during the socialist construction, one of the things that was really pushed was anti-Qabil sentiment, which is anti-clan sentiment. Qabil
Okay.
means clan.
Hmm.
And educating Somali people on the fact that like being like clanists, Qabilist is not the way,
Hmm.
and that clearly outside forces are seeing the inter issues amongst us, weaponizing that to keep us divided,
Right.
right? And so the Somaliweyn movement really is just like a banner to unite Somali people under one thing, right? Because we're
Hmm.
stronger together. A group of people are always going to be stronger together, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so but yeah, so yeah, that's what the political, I guess, representation of Somalia is with the
No,
Somali.
that's that. Yeah, that's perfect. That because that's what I was wondering. And that makes perfect sense. And as far because anything that they see that they can use to divide a movement or divide a people, um, they'll do that to weaken any type of movements, and upper and any type of resistance and rebellion. That's one of their playbook, right? And
Mhm.
so that's what I was curious about. So definitely, I appreciate you for shedding light on that. Um, Given ongoing Western involvement in funding genocides and coups all across the world at this point, right? The notion of Western exceptionalism appears to be eroding. How do you perceive the global perception of the West in 2024, particularly outside of Western countries? And the
Mhm.
reason I wanted to ask you that is because here, a lot of people are just trapped in that bubble of of American exceptionalism, Western exceptionalism, white hegemony being the norm. Um, but and from you know your point of view, what do you think about just that whole idea of Western exceptionalism eroding in the eyes of people outside of the West, or was it always that way?
I think, yeah, I don't know whether or not there's ever been a point in like the global South seeing the West in any kind of like positive light, right?
Mm-hmm.
And um, yeah, I don't, because when I think about it from like the Somali perspective, the first time there was like Somalia is such an interesting example because it's one of those places that so much interventionism exists, and it's now manifesting in different ways. Before, you had like, it was full on like boots on the ground, like US soldiers on Somali soil literally trying to invade. Now it's coming in the form of like NGOs that come in and say, like, we're going to feed you guys, we're going to give you, because again, like Somalia is a poor country, there's a need for resources, right? And so we'll come in, and under the guise of humanitarian aid, and nothing gets done, and they literally are making money off of poverty
Right.
in an African country.
Hmm.
And then you have the airstrikes that will claim that they're fighting like terrorism in these regions, and they're just, they'll kill like a terrorist or two, but they're killing hundreds of just like innocent civilians.
Right.
And they'll be like, job well done, we got the terrorists. You never mind the hundred civilians that we just like slaughtered. And yeah, and then like thinking about like how Black Hawk Down is sort of seen in the consciousness of Somali people versus how it's seen in like the global, in the well, specifically in the American context. It's
Hmm.
like for Somalis, it was an invasion. Like, it
Yeah.
was under the guise of like UN intervention, we're gonna help you guys. And it was, they slaughtered elders, they killed, like prominent elders in our community.
Well, before you
And
go there, can we from the beginning,
yeah,
like what, if you can tell us about what happened, like Black Hawk Down, the
yeah,
whole, what happened? Because a lot of people may only know what,
yeah, the
again, what the
movie.
West told them and what the movie
Yeah, yeah,
says,
yeah,
you know what
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean? So
yeah.
what really happened?
So basically, after the Civil War, at a certain point, Somalia delves into like civil war, right?
Hmm.
It's chaos at this point, right? And under the guise of them, of the United Nations and the US of trying to relieve famine, they wanted to send in humanitarian aid. And uh, what ended up happening was, eventually it just started turning into, there was these ideas of just like weapons like floating around or whatever, and they'd wanted to find like these weapons or something like that. And the UN blamed the president at the time, I forget what his name is, for essentially like giving like arms to people on the ground. They go in and try to take back like this armed, I think it was like a specific area that they believed had arms. They killed elders, and because of the killing of these elders that were specific, prominent like members of the community,
Hmm.
it was mass outrage, mass
Of
outrage.
course, right.
And Somali people took this as an act of war, which it
Hmm.
was. Like, you
Right.
kill, people who are essentially are seen as leaders. They armed themselves, and there was a helicopter, and they took down the helicopter, killing something like multiple helicopters, and killed something like 18 troops, 18
Mhm.
American troops. And the news like played this on like the television screens of Americans everywhere, watching US soldiers being dragged through the streets, dead bodies dragged through the streets of the capital city, Mogadishu. And it was dubbed, I think people were saying that since at that specific time, at that specific point, they said, we haven't had this many US soldiers die since Vietnam, is what
Mm.
they were categorizing.
Really?
Yeah, that's what they said.
Wow. Wow.
And so what the American consciousness thinks of that day is, it's one day too. It was like, it all happened between like, not even like, it was like one day that basically all that took place. And and the American consciousness is like, they see it as like these Africans like going crazy, and they're like just killing American soldiers, and it's like they see it as like, oh, or they paint it as like this was a battle that could never be won. This was like us against like an uphill battle of just like trying to like, tame the untameless.
Right.
It's so interesting how it sort of penetrates like even popular media. I was watching what was it? I think it was the first season of True Detective. I don't know if you've seen
Mhm.
that show. And do you know,
I think I haven't seen. Is it on Netflix?
I think it's on HBO.
Might be. Okay, yeah. I was
Okay,
scrolling
okay.
HBO Max the other day too. I saw it, but I haven't watched it.
Okay.
Mhm.
So the first season of True Detective is starring Matthew McConaughey and another actor. I don't know what his name is. Matthew McConaughey's character is trying to essentially like they're trying to find some killer. And in order for them to try to find this killer, they need to like befriend like a biker gang, right?
Mhm.
And so through befriending this biker gang, they make him like go into a black neighborhood to steal something or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And as they're telling him, he's like, I don't think we should go. We're going to be outnumbered. And he literally says the phrase, it's going to be like Migdosha,
Wow.
referring to Black Hawk Down, calling
Wow.
like, so isn't it? It's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so, and there's so many like media examples of that.
Mhm.
And it's just interesting too.
Well,
And
that's why I wanted to ask you that question because that propaganda machine works so on so many here, right?
yeah.
But the people that these things affect the hardest sometimes, as you pointed out, never saw the West in that light that they
Mhm.
portrayed to its own citizens. You know what I mean? And I think, you know, we have these movements like you see them online, man, like they these American flag waving
Yeah.
and I often ask them, I was like, yo, so like whenever we think about imperialism and US imperialism and this flag, right? I was like, what are your thoughts on that? And they don't, it seems like they've been there and with their want and need for assimilation, like they don't really care. They just want a piece of that
Mhm.
imperialist pie, you know, and you know, I hate that idea. I hate that people don't see, first off, to not side with the oppressed, regardless to where they are, in my opinion, just makes you a terrible person, right? You're a piece of
Mhm.
shit.
Mhm.
Like, but the idea that you're going to appeal to the moral authority of a group that doesn't have any morals in order to make your life potentially better in a, you know, as far as your material conditions, it just makes no sense, right?
Right.
um and I think people need to really understand, like what you were just saying, that the rest of the world does not view this place the same way that people here views this
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and you know, when we think about the global south and we think about all of the things that um you know the West has done to put their own puppet leaders in and to
Yeah.
quell any type of uh, movements for the people in the global South to have any agency over their lives, communities,
Mhm.
nations, governments. You know, it's a terrible thing, and so yeah, I mean, I I could definitely see how all over the world, like it's never been like uh, a big, you know, thing to see America the way America sees itself.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I just think that's an important point for people who may not understand, who may are just began to start studying any type of uh, uh, anti-imperialist politics. That, you know, hey man, you got a lot to undo because we have been fed American exceptionalism from the time we were born, you know, just
Yeah.
being in this country, right? And uh, if you've been here long enough, you know, it's always a little bit of a little bit of that you got to undo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even when you have the you know, well-intentioned people, and so yeah, it goes deep. So I just wanted to. I'm glad you shed some light on that because I think people need to realize that you know
Mhm.
this bubble that we live in here is not the reality of the whole entire world. Um, and like next question I wanted to ask you though, during the pandemic, right? um, the anti-racism movement in America began. You know, you had people like Ibram Kendi and some others that were, you know, doing these, selling these, well, writing these anti-racism books and doing a lot of
Yeah.
seminars and things of that nature. Um, but when we think about, uh, you know, matter of fact, just from my opinion too, in a lot of ways, those anti-racism books and seminars were just here to ease white people's discomfort with history and racism. But when we think about anti-colonialism movements, right? And I think we will both see that as a more effective lens to view our situations and our plight in.
Mhm.
But if you can, like, just speak on why you would say an anti-colonial lens is preferable over an anti-racism lens
Mhm.
whenever reviewing what's happening in the world.
Yeah. Well, I found this question to be very interesting because I've also have had the same sentiments with like the anti-racism movement, especially in how it kind of really sort of took over the conversation or the discourse of 2020
Hmm.
and the death and the murder actually of George Floyd.
Right.
And so um at that moment I just felt like I couldn't really say anything. Like it was
Hmm.
just
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
was,
I got it.
emotions were high.
Hmm.
Everyone was going a little cuckoo bananas in their apartments and houses because of the not being able to leave. So there was a bit of a time. I feel like time had to pass in order for us to finally have like this kind of conversation. But yeah, just like specific to the anti-racism movement, what the anti-racism movement I think functionally does is very similar to how like the environment activists kind of move and kind of taking, issues like the environment and whittling it down to like personal responsibility, where it's like you got to
Yeah,
recycle, you get a paper
yeah.
straw, and it's just like, okay, but like there's clearly like corporations here that are like genuinely like they're messing up the environment. Like
Right.
as much as I can take as many, I can as recycle as much as I can. I can use as many paper straws. That's not gonna, actually like
Hmm.
address like the issue of the environment. It's the same thing with racism. And so with the book, what is it? How to be an anti-racist, how
Yeah.
to white fragility. Like these books take issues of racism, which are mass structural oppression that cannot be separated from colonialism, from imperialism, from capitalism, and whittle it down to microaggressions,
Hmm.
allyship,
Hmm.
how like white people act. Like
Right.
it's like um and and the solutions to it is like anti-racism workshops
Yeah.
and getting like and look, if you want to scam,
Right.
liberal,
Because that's what it is. I'm all
yeah,
for it
like,
too. But go ahead. Go
but
ahead and
it's just like if you want to scam
finish.
liberal white people, like okay, like
Yeah.
go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
But like let's actually like be serious here for a second, you know?
Yeah.
And so yeah, and I think and you're exactly right about the like anti-colonial critique being a more sound one because it includes critiques of capitalism.
Hmm.
It takes things into account like imperialism. And yeah, and then when you look at the anti-racism movement and see who's pushing it, it's like, okay, so great, you're running anti-racism workshops within the confines of institutions like, corporate America or, universities or whatever. It's like, okay, that's great. But what about the most like oppressed people in our society?
Right.
How do anti-racism workshops help like a young black woman, a black child, a black man? Like, how does that help just like again, like the most oppressed in society? And I don't think anti-racism framework even takes them into account, really.
Yeah.
Like it's very much like and I think that and the author of the person who wrote how to be a anti-racist, he gets like millions of dollars
Millions.
from it to run these workshops. And it's like, okay, great job. You're making your university less racist, but
Hmm.
like, and I'm putting that in quotation marks because I don't know how these workshops actually function. But well, again, how does that help the broader like Black community? I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. I've been yet to give me an answer, but like whatever.
I don't think it does, and I just don't think it does. Is because we're appealing to white people to treat us better, and
Exactly.
that's first off, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Secondly, that's not liberation, right? Because
Mhm.
we're still centering them. Um,
Yeah.
I wonder if, and I highly doubt it. Matter of fact, I think we both know that if they took a stance in these seminars and in these books that even in America, Black people are colonized people. This is a settler colonial state. Um, Capitalism and imperialism are part of this white hegemony that plagues the world. That wouldn't get any funding.
No. No,
That
absolutely
wouldn't get
not.
any funding
No.
whatsoever. It might get you
No.
canceled. You know what I mean?
No. No. It
But
doesn't get you tenure. It doesn't get you the book deals. It doesn't get you like you
Right.
know.
That's the thing, like even as problematic as some parts of his life were, but Eldridge Cleaver just he spoke about the idea if you don't see yourself as a colonized person within this nation, you're not viewing your situation properly. And
Mhm.
even whenever we look at Kwame Ture and Black Power, um, how he talks about you know acts of individual racism compared to institutional racism, and
Yeah.
it seems like this whole anti-racism movement would is like, you called me the N word, or your microaggressions that you mentioned. That's individual racism. When we start talking about institutional racism, they call it CRT and create legislations
Exactly.
to stop, teaching this. It's not even first off, they don't even understand what CRT is. But
Yeah,
as you
yeah.
know, when you're talking about something institutional, that's when they attempt to, silence
Hmm.
that. And
Hmm.
we've seen that. And I think we should all remember and understand that if they are pushing the movement, it's probably not the movement for us. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly, exactly.
Um,
And funding it in millions, like funding it in like yeah, they don't fund like
yeah,
exactly what you said, they don't fund CRT in the way that they do when it comes to like these anti-racism things. And it's just like because it's literally functions as a way to continue us being like in conflict with each other. As
right.
long as we're preoccupied within our own little spaces and fighting and like whatever,
Hmm.
then nothing ever gets solved, right?
Right.
And it's
Hmm.
designed to be that way.
Yeah. It's like a dog chasing his tail. I mean, at this point, I just and I'm with you. I didn't want to say anything in the beginning because there was so much going on, and you don't want to, in some cases, you want to see what develops out of the energy it's created amongst the
Yeah.
people. But now, I mean, we have time to look at it, and it serves no purpose for us, in
Yeah.
my opinion. Um, whenever we, you know, I think it may have been a month ago. I don't have the exact date, but we all know. Um, whenever we saw the Aaron Bushnell, active military member, choosing the path of self-immolation as an act of, solidarity with Palestine, and how the media covered it. For one, did you see any mainstream reports on that? And if you did, like, what was the angle that they?
So so I saw coverage,
Mm-hmm,
and I think it was MSNBC. That was the first one that I saw where I was surprised. I'm like, oh, okay, they actually like included what he said,
mm-hmm,
right? And what his reasoning for what he did. But then it delved into something else completely, where they ended up painting him as someone who's mentally ill.
mm-hmm,
They talked about how he was like estranged from his family at one point. And Aaron was raised. So like ever since, so when I saw the video, I immediately was obviously it was incredibly just like I can't even like express like how I what I was even feeling at the time, but it was every time I learned a new thing about him, it like broke my heart like over and over and over again. It was very um uh a loss, like losing somebody like him. And he, from what I understand, he was raised in some kind of a cult, with
mm-hmm,
some kind of a Christian cult.
mm-hmm.
He ended up leaving his family through that, ended up joining the US military. And because of that estrangement, people were using that against him.
Right.
Um, yeah, to paint him as like mentally ill. Um, but yes, I saw coverage. It was just like very much people were painting him as mentally ill was one that was constantly repeated. Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's always, it seems like it's not, they're not even really creative anymore with how they do these things, because it's always, whenever it's something that goes against the establishment, it's mental illness. It's never anybody having a real thorough critique
Hmm.
of this system, capitalism,
Hmm.
uh, genocide, imperialism. It's never anybody having a real understanding and critique and
Hmm.
resistance against these things, it's always
Hmm.
mental illness, you know,
Yeah.
and I just don't think people are
Yeah.
buying it anymore. I mean, I never bought it, but I think the people that were possibly on the fence at one point, um, I mean, there's no way
Yeah.
you can see that and not see, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at the same time, we have people who are willfully ignorant, who have bought into the system and believe every word of it. Because I mean,
Yeah.
we see them online, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
it's a sad state of affairs when you can boil something down where somebody is willing to uh, give their life for
Hmm.
an idea,
Yeah.
and you can boil it down and will it down to it's just
Yeah.
mental illness. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Um,
And Huey like talks about this. Like he has a book on the difference between like, dying for your people. He calls it revolutionary
yes,
suicide
absolutely.
versus reactionary suicide, where it's like suicide where you succumb to your mental illness versus, actively fighting for the oppressed and paying with your life for it, right?
Hmm.
And so obviously the greater you just have, first of all, you just have just people who are just against the Palestinian cause, right?
Hmm.
And I don't know how you can categorize somebody who woke up one morning, and he knew this, like he knew this, especially like because he was very active on message boards, and was very aware of the fact that he was a white guy that was in the military, who was aware of that. He got up one morning, he put on his military uniform, stood in front of the Israeli embassy, and continued to shout the phrase "Free Palestine" over and over again until he couldn't anymore,
Hmm.
because that image in of itself is such a strong, it's a powerful image that can't be ignored,
Right.
right? And then how that connects to the greater Palestinian cause. You have Palestinians in Palestine that are now naming streets after him.
Wow.
There were protests in Yemen where people were waving and holding pictures of him in Yemen.
Wow.
And so what Aaron did and what he paid what he paid with his life is uniting people within the imperial core that are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause with those in the global south. And he linked us together. That is, it is not just a
Mm.
fight that's like on the back of Palestinians in Gaza. It's not just on the back of people in Yemen that are waging a war against the ships that are going into the Suez Canal and stopping, fully just like going to war with the capital right now and trying to stifle Israeli shipments coming in, and that it's we are all united under this. And so I think, um, yeah, I think Aaron, yeah, I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
it's a really sad case. It's he had positive like outlooks and critique of understanding of like Black nationalism. Like it was just very sad. Like every time I discovered like something else, like it just broke my heart. Like I couldn't like, yeah, I don't know. It was
No, I know, definitely, definitely. I totally understand. And you know, you kind of mentioned it just now, but you know, people have been conditioned to perceive global issues as isolated incidents when you know we know the interconnectedness of this system, and it all stems from Western imperialism and white hegemony. Could you discuss the significance of fostering solidarity among all colonized people?
fostering I d- yeah, I think, well, first and foremost, I think it starts with understanding what are that are our causes are and our issues are all linked, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And I'll take it back to just like the to Africa for a second. Like it is not a coincidence that the same entities that were essentially drawing borders, um, removing Somali people from being able to, move freely and essentially just like just really just destroying our way of life. We're the same entities that were stealing African people and their bodies to continue to do free labor in what is now North America. Like
Hmm.
it's the same people,
Right.
right? And so um I think ultimately it really just comes down to like understanding that like our issues are linked,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Like I don't know how else to sort of like we got the same enemies. If we got the same enemies, let's just like all work together, you know?
Yeah.
And by working together and understanding our struggles, um, I think that'll like help both people in the global south and within for Black Americans in the United States as well. Like, I think everything that I sort of ingrained myself with is definitely with the framework that the Black Panthers held. And as someone who, again, like this isn't my history, and I think the fact that like their story and the things that they were fighting for speaks so heavily to the things that I
Hmm.
advocate. It's like it's not a coincidence. It's the same thing,
Absolutely.
right?
And
And
I think that was not only the Panthers, Malcolm, and his, he
exactly.
began to see things from an international idea,
Yeah.
and then he, in 64, he took his tour to Africa. Hell, Dr. King was in Ghana in 57 with Nkrumah, and we have people now who are quote unquote, I mean, they agent provocateurs to me, but everybody else can hold their own nuts. It's the Black American, the Tariq Nasheed type of people, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
and I hate the fact that, like, but it's,
He does not like Somali people. I don't know what happened. He got
well, he
into
was
it.
a Pan-African and now he's a Black Native American. Like, I don't know what he got going. You know what I'm saying? But I heard that, I don't know, like, half the people he has in his FBA museum are Pan-Africans. So it's like it's really just a
Okay.
grift. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I don't get it. You say he doesn't like Somalis, but he may make a documentary on if he if he finds some money in it,
Oh, okay.
because he does that with Haitians now, but he has
Okay.
a documentary called 1804 about the
Okay.
Haitian
Oh,
Revolution.
where he's speaking positively?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay, okay.
No, that's what he's fake. You know what I'm saying? Like we got to get that. Like, no,
Yeah.
like he'll go wherever the money goes. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
But the thing that I hate is the fact that, and I know it's mostly like a fringe group online.
Yeah.
But I hate when people online may see these people, talking negatively about the, rest of the diaspora and people on the continent as if they're representation of how most of us feel.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
As
You're
uh,
talking about like diaspora wars and yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I dislike that because that's not the normal reality for
Yeah.
everyday Africans in America, whether you're from the continent or whether
Yeah.
your ancestors were brought here, through the
Yeah.
transatlantic slave trade, and so yeah, those diaspora wars are trash, and I think the reason I brought that up is just because of the we were just talking about the need for solidarity among colonized people. Like, that's the key.
Yeah.
That's what the Panthers understood. That's, well,
Yeah.
one of the things,
Yeah.
out of the many that the Panthers understood. But
Yeah.
there were none. Most of our freedom fighters that came before us saw the world globally instead
Yeah.
of just what was happening domestically.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think it's important we continue in with that tradition, even with the growing movements of people, the growing hold your own nuts movements, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah.
I'll never, that's counter revolutionary and reactionary to me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. And like too, and I think the main reason as to why a lot of these movements that we're thinking internationally is just like you're also like a minority in it you're in the belly of the beast, like
Hmm.
in the empire, and you're a minority. Like in order for it to progress the way that like specifically the Black Panthers was because they needed like that not only just within the African diaspora, but within like the Puerto Rican movement
Absolutely.
and they even like made or they I forget what that white what were
Oh
they
yeah, it was well, yeah, actually they were hold on, uh because you had
you had the young lords and then you had
the
I forgot what they were, but anyways it's
yeah,
just that
you had the okay, no, go ahead, keep going. I know you
but
did
yeah,
have the White Panther Party, but there
is
was
that what they
another,
were?
yeah, hmm.
Okay. um and yeah, and I think yeah, so like yeah, just I think that and when they started making those connections, that's when they were being seen as more dangerous,
Hmm.
and like being seen as a threat was that like, oh my God, like they're now they're organizing all these groups, like it's no longer just like black people, like they're actually doing like they're building like a mass party here. And yeah, so I think it's just like, it's not just, working together because it's the good thing to do. It's also working together because working together is a part of like our survival,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And it's the same thing with, it's neck and neck with like what is going on, like tying it back to like the Somaliweyn movement. It's just like, it is either we work together or there might not be us in like a couple
Mm.
decades.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, yeah, that's deep. And I mean, it's real. Like whenever you going back to the Somali Wayne movement, how does like so like the people who are still there in the region, um, and like books like Somali like books that center the Somali Wayne movement, like are they hard to get in the region? Because I have friends like in Ghana that asked me to send them Nkrumah books because they won't sell them there. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so like
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you know literature about the Somali Wayne movement is hard to get or hard to or like are you able to send it back home if somebody wanted it? Like how does that work?
I think that the works of the socialist construction,
Hmm.
because they had like pamphlets that were talking about like all different kinds of ideas when it came to like, land reform, women's issues, like everything under the sun. They have access to that, like that is in Somali. I think what's definitely needed for sure, and there's one author, his name is Aziz. I'm forgetting his last name. He's going to be so upset that I forgot his last name, but is in the process of translating the works of like Fanon and
Mm,
other works as well, and trying to get them in the hands of Somali people. I think most books you
wow.
can. I don't know if there's actual. We're not at that point yet. We're in like book banning mode.
Hmm.
But no, I think you can easily get books specifically that were produced by the socialist construction. I think what is needed for sure more Pan-Africanist texts. Um, but yeah,
Do
it's
you
still going
recommend any
on.
books here for, people that are interested in, learning about the movement and,
Yeah.
some of the finer details?
Yeah, yeah. I have a pinned tweet on my Twitter that has like a bunch of texts that are
Okay.
there. So if people want to go there, that's like a good starting point. Yeah, it's just pinned on my Twitter, so I've got it there
I
for
got it.
folks.
And I had a link in the description for
Yeah,
everybody, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Um, it's all right. So the last thing I wanted to ask you, with you streaming on Twitch and having a big social media presence as well, what do you think the role is for like, anti-imperialist streaming and on social media, like as far as uh how effective do you think it is, using these platforms and getting the word out and informing and educating the people about
Mhm.
what's really going on?
Well, yeah, I think what's interesting is like how I even got started was just I literally just made like a Twitter account, and
Hmm.
be as I was continuing to like educate myself, I would, make threads, and um over the past few years I've like cultivated somewhat of like a small audience that people are now interested in. And I was like, okay, well, if I can pull like, this many people on Twitter, I wonder what I could do with like Twitch.
Hmm.
And I specifically went with Twitch because it's just an easier form. You can just like jump on a mic and just say whatever you want, and then as soon as you end the live, it like uploads.
Hmm.
So you have, and then through there you can like make little clips and like share that around. It is a little dangerous because it's live. So like if you say
Yeah.
something, it gets clipped, that's it.
That's
It's
it.
like there's no going back, there's no
Yeah.
editing. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I've started around January in the new
Mhm.
year, and it's been going like pretty well. Like I'm developing like somewhat of like an audience there, and it's working. And yeah, I think if you're someone who has an anti-imperialist framework, especially if you're someone who has an anti-imperialist framework from a position and from a country that like a lot of people just don't really know about, like make a YouTube channel, make a Twitch,
Mm,
whatever you're comfortable. Even do, I don't know. TikTok now is a little bit up in the air because it's about to be
yeah,
another if it's going to be banned or not. But yeah, like I think it's like there needs to be more people who hold our politics like making content because right now it's like few and far between. And I think everyone Twitter is a really good well, Twitter is like mixed sometimes like there's a lot of space to say a lot of BS and whatever,
yeah,
but if you have a knack for making videos, you have a knack for making content, like continue to just definitely do that. Yeah. And
yeah. I think it's definitely important too because I think as more people turn away from the corporate media narrative, they're looking for things that are telling the truth about what's happening. And channels like yours, uh, and others, and people doing things similar all across the different platforms on social media. I think it's extremely important. People don't really read newspapers like that anymore.
no, no.
And this is a new way to consume information and uh, without having to go through any middleman, nobody trying to censor you yet,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll
but
see. We'll see.
yeah.
Twitch is like one of those places where if you get on the wrong side of like the people whoever run the site, you can get like they can for sure like censor you.
Mm,
Instagram, I tried doing Instagram. I can't. Instagram is like you have to do all these tricks to like censor yourself all like otherwise you just like either I the amount of people I know whose Instagram accounts have been banned because they've been
mm,
either been talking about Palestine
mhm.
is like insane, so that wasn't even an option. But we'll see with Twitch. I don't know, it's like it's interesting, like I'm literally just like waiting for the day till I get kicked out. I'm like, all right, I
Yeah.
gotta go to kick now. I don't know.
Yeah. Word. Well, Hayat, I wanted to let you know, man. I appreciate everything that you're doing. I appreciate, just keeping the message out and also, informing us about the Somaliweyn movement. I think it's important that we know about all of these different, uh, you know, movements in the global South that are about agency, and from an anti-imperialist framework and standpoint, I appreciate it. Like before I had never heard of it, to be honest with you, and I read a lot, but like you said, there are movements everywhere, all across the world that are happening, and if you are from one of those places or you have knowledge, it's definitely important that get the word out to everybody else. And so now, um, I definitely I already had the book list that you created, so I got stuff in my cart that I'm about to get.
Good.
So again, thank you, for coming through and letting us know, about the
Mhm.
Somaliweyn movement and your other ideas and thoughts on what's happening in this world.
Mhm. Of course, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. It was a pleasure. Peace.